So I came across this video saying that Sam Raimi doesn't understand Spider-Man, specifically in Spider-Man 2 of all movies. Before I respond, I want to clarify that I don't criticize or defend the writing of an adaptation on the basis of how accurate it is to the original source material. However, the changes made in an adaptation can be interesting to discuss nonetheless, or what elements of the source material inspired the adaptation, and I think a lot of the reasoning in this video is built on misinterpretations of both Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man comics. I'm not going to play long, unedited portions of his video, so just watch his video on your own if you want to see all of its contents before looking at my response.
So he quits. As a result, much like Far From Home and not like Spider-Man 2, Peter Parker doesn't surrender his responsibility over a girl or his own selfish desires, but because he believes quitting is the more responsible action.
So this has a lot to break down. First of all, Peter doesn't quit in Spider-Man 2 because MJ's upset with him. He still chooses to be Spider-Man after that. Second of all, Peter's life has been getting kicked in the stomach this entire movie, and he still tried his best to be Spider-Man. The moment he quits starts with him going to the doctor about his powers. He doesn't have a direct answer as to why he's losing his powers, even though that could give him an excuse to stop being Spider-Man. He goes to the doctor with the intent of finding out what's wrong and potentially fixing it if that's an option. The doctor instead tells Peter that maybe he's not supposed to be Spider-Man, and that's why he keeps falling. It leads Peter to believe that maybe the Spider-Man life isn't realistic for him, and that he can't live Uncle Ben's dreams no matter how hard he tries. If he's just going to fail over and over until it kills him, then it's pretty clear why Peter would think quitting is the more responsible choice. Especially since he's still pursuing his science degree and believes in what Octavius said regarding using his gift of intelligence to help mankind. He still wants to help people through his gifts. He just doesn't think Spider-Man is a realistic way of going about it, which is reflective of what Peter in the comics believes when he says he was just an unthinking teenager when he first became Spider-Man. He also brings up Far From Home as if that movie did a better job executing the idea of Spider-Man quitting, and there's a lot to say about that. Before I do, I'll just play this clip from a video my friend Colin made discussing why Far From Home is a badly written movie.
So the entire world is at risk of being destroyed, and Peter doesn't want to help. The fact that he even needs to be convinced of this is already dumb. But let's look at the reasons he gives. 1. His identity, despite the fact that he literally just helped out earlier with the water monster. But okay. 2. I just want to go on a vacation with my girlfriend. Okay, MJ is gonna die, and so will everyone you know, so that's a shit excuse. Next. 3. He doesn't think he's good enough. So, do you think you're not good enough to be alive either? Because that's the threat. And 4, he says his aunt will kill him. Bitch, please, she packed the suit. Did the writers for this movie just forget about this line from Infinity War?
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood.
None of these excuses work, and Peter is blatantly character assassinated in this scene. He also says after this, I'm just happy I don't have to go to Prague. What the fuck? Your main reason you don't want to do this is because you don't feel like you're good enough. Which again, already is a dumb reason, which I already went over. So now why do you turn around and say this? Seeming as though you're happy about this, instead of worried your world might fucking die and you're gonna do nothing about it.
I'm gonna add on to this by saying that Peter still refused after learning that people were already hurt as a result of these elementals in spite of Mysterio's presence. Fury brings up that a village was wiped out in Mexico and a village was destroyed in Morocco.
A village in Mexico was wiped out by a cyclone. 3 days later, a similar event in Morocco. A village was destroyed by what may well be another world-threatening.
So if Peter actually believed in doing what's responsible, he would realize he was wrong to dodge all of Fury's calls. He would realize that if he was with Mysterio those first 2 times, he could have helped prevent the destruction to those villages and save the people hurt or killed from those events. But in the movie, at no point does Peter actually appear sad or regretful when informed of 2 villages getting destroyed. People either died or were hurt from that, and Peter doesn't care. But when you compare that to Spider-Man 2, Peter blatantly feels sad when he sees a kid getting beaten up, and he doesn't have the power to stop it. And Peter looks defeated when he realizes that 1 person died in that burning building in spite of him rushing in to help, and he's still sad about it the next day. Peter blatantly says in Far From Home that he's glad he doesn't have to go to Prague. Mysterio has to fight the most powerful elemental, more powerful than ones that successfully destroyed entire villages.
There's only one left. Fire.
The strongest of them all, the one that destroyed my Earth.
Even if Mysterio wins the fight like the previous battles, there's still a good chance people will die and have parts of their town destroyed. And if Mysterio loses to the fire elemental like he did on his Earth, then everybody dies, including Peter and his loved ones. Far From Home already destroys his character when trying to execute a similar idea. In what way does it handle it better than Spider-Man 2?
Because if someone else's voice was louder than his own. So, if your main reference point for Spider-Man or the Raimi movies, then prepare to have your mind blown, because the differences run far deeper than organic web shooters. Instead, Spider-Man's motivations and the very fundamental message he presents are completely different, and Stan Lee's work will show you why.
I can agree that there are obvious changes to Peter's personality in the Raimi movies, but as far as the character arcs Peter goes through in his first two movies, they're literally on point with the source material. While they're brought into original stories, the spirit of Peter Parker in the comics is very strongly reflected in the first two Raimi movies.
New York is shocked and confused because everyone is vulnerable. As Frederick Foswell regretfully says, I don't have to be a genius to figure out what's going on. Spider-Man helped to keep the underworld on the run. They were disorganized, fearful, cautious, but now it's different. With the web slinger out of action, they're ready to pull their forces. However, as the city begins to decline, Peter's own life improves. He has a good time walking down the street, eating a hot dog, and actually, no, the opposite happens. Real Peter Parker's life doesn't actually get better because everyone he didn't have time for now don't have time for him.
This is blatantly untrue. Peter literally tells MJ he's going to stay with Aunt May for a while, and this is why he says no more guilt feelings about Aunt May. The entire point of Peter being happy after quitting is to show that he does have more time to commit to his loved ones. If he were Spider-Man, he probably wouldn't be able to stay with Aunt May and mysteriously disappear once again.
Aunt May is automatically better and is off to the movies with Anna Watson. MJ is busy with her rehearsals, and as the thought boxes reveal, regardless if Peter did or didn't accept Gwen's invitation, she was always in love with him. When he confidently flirts with her, Gwen explains, "Oh, you lovable blind goof, can't you see I do?" As a result, as much as I love Spider-Man 2, it mind-blowingly doesn't get this story. The point of showing Peter Parker quitting isn't to show how much better his life would be, but to concretely show how little difference it would make.
Peter literally says he feels like $1,000,000. No more worries, no more problems. Shoulda kissed Spidey off long ago. And he actually has time to study now. There's a reason they contrast Peter failing to make time for his family and friends and to study for school before he quits to the more peaceful and laid-back life he has after he quits, where he can make time for his family and friends as well as his studies.
He literally says, "So I gave up being Spider-Man to have more time for my family and my friends, only to find out they don't need me. Might as well go home and bury myself in a book."
This is literally just a passing comment Peter makes regarding what's happening right now. That doesn't mean his friends and family won't need him in the future. To Peter, the benefit of quitting is that when those times come, when his loved ones need him, he is more available to support them. In the same panel, he says he's going to bury himself in a book. That doesn't mean he's going to do that forever and not bother with his friends or family as if he'll never be needed.
Therefore, being Spider-Man isn't supposed to be a one-way sacrifice, but it's more emotionally akin to a hobby. Similar to Gwen's get-togethers that keep everyone together and connected, or Mary Jane's pursuit in acting, it's responsibility that gives Peter Parker healthy distraction and an output for his talent. This is how his personality is given more content, and this is especially noticeable within the first 30 issues, where you actively see Peter Parker become more and more confident and more popular. Peter Parker simply had a bad day and jumped the gun before everything improved on its own. It's that experience we've all had when you panic, overthink, and overcorrect your own life and create a problem that wasn't actually there.
That is literally what happened with Raimi's Peter Parker. He's overthinking what it means to be losing his powers, as if that means he isn't meant to be Spider-Man. What it actually means is that he's struggling to balance both the Peter Parker and Spider-Man elements of his life, and that he needs to go on a journey where he finds that balance, and has a better consideration on what sacrifices need to be made.
The results really shouldn't be raindrops keep falling on my head.
So Peter Parker shouldn't be happy after he quits being Spider-Man? That's literally in Spider-Man No More. How is this any different?
Furthermore, one of the major differences between Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man No More are the consequences. I know it sounds like a total meme because people often refer to Spider-Man 2 as a positive example of showing negative effects on Peter Parker's life, but that's the issue. It's only his personal life that's affected. There's no permanent or long-term ramifications on Spider-Man's side. Spider-Man as a character has two sides. There's the interpersonal melodrama with Peter Parker that's either treated as a miserable journey through hell, or a sitcom? See part 1 of my retrospective to get a clear idea of what I'm on about. And there's the crime drama side, with long-running cases, mysteries, and returning villains with escalating situations. In the movie, it only really cares about one side, because a New York without Spider-Man only results in one guy being mugged, a vague graph.
If crime is going up 75%, that's a really big deal. Especially since crime was so bad that Peter gets interrupted from his personal life daily, and Doc Ock is still making his machine without Peter's knowledge.
Tritium is making the machine again.
So, there literally are consequences to the Spider-Man side of Peter's life.
An off-screen rando dying in a fire, and absolutely no police investigating Dr. Octopus, even though he's murdered loads of people, publicly robbed a bank, and threw an old lady off a building. In issue 50, do you know what happens? The Kingpin is introduced, because without Spider-Man, he finally enacts his plans to unite all of the crime gangs around and run them like a business.
Okay, and without Spider-Man around, Doc Ock proceeds to make his fusion reactor that can destroy the city. I don't even know what the Kingpin proves about the Spider-Man side getting worse. The core idea is that crime gets worse and the city suffers for it without Spider-Man's help. This is literally what happens in Spider-Man 2.
There's daylight robberies, attack on police officers, poor Frederick Foswell is beaten and kidnapped while he's undercover. The city is f***ed and we have to spend several issues cleaning it up.
Spider-Man literally has to save the city from a dangerous fusion reactor that could destroy the city, or even the world if it self-sustains and gets too big.
Therefore, the movie's vagueness is effectively designed to be dismissive, so you don't have to deal with Spider-Man's side afterwards, and he can exist in his goofy little isolated cartoony world, and that's great, I love this movie, but that's just wrong. The consequences shouldn't just be, oh, his friends are mad.
His friends are mad at him as a result of being Spider-Man. Being Spider-Man is what scares off criminals from the streets.
But in the community of enemies he's unavoidably making that's creating more and more daggers over his head.
But it's not Spider-Man specifically that's taking the heat of the crime wave because he's literally quitting. It's the city as a whole.
The crime world needs to have weight. It needs to have dread. Spider-Man is supposed to be New York's antibody fighting off every virus, and without it, New York is never the same anymore.
They literally have supervillains that only Spider-Man can stop to reflect this, as well as showing us that crime has increased as a result of Spider-Man quitting.
Things get so bad that Peter Parker has to save an officer from criminals as himself.
Just like how things get so bad that Peter has to save someone from a burning building as himself.
Uncle Ben was just a dude who only appeared in 5 panels in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. He died off screen and never ever said, "With great power comes with great responsibility," because it came from a non-diegetic narration box.
This is entirely false. An issue from Spider-Man vs. Wolverine shows Peter saying that those are Uncle Ben's words. I understand it's a retcon, but it's still canon, and this comic is from 1987, and it's way better if Uncle Ben says this line, because it elevates his significance to what Peter learns, his own character, and the weight behind having failed him. The origin is so much better if Peter's failure was to not listen to Uncle Ben, resulting in Ben's death. That makes the tragedy more impactful and more haunting, and it strengthens the reason for Peter's guilt. He also implies that Uncle Ben was just some guy who died off screen to jumpstart Peter's origin, when this entirely undermines the ways in which later comics have tried to develop Ben's importance and his overall character. And considering the major constraints they were dealing with at the time of Amazing Fantasy 15, and the fact that they needed to put together a 20-page origin to get people invested in the character of Spider-Man, I can understand why Ben's importance would have to be developed throughout later issues, as opposed to the origin story, like we see with Ultimate Spider-Man or the first Raimi movie. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 181, Peter talks about how Ben was the best friend he ever had, someone who always built him up while others tore him down. This is something that's touched upon in Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1, but it gets expanded upon in this issue, and while Peter doesn't state that the great responsibility line came from Ben, he considers Ben his teacher. There's also a moment in Amazing Spider-Man issue 370 where Aunt May talks about what it was like to raise Peter. She was scared of the mere idea of that because of her personal experiences with her parents, where they would constantly argue with each other, and May always felt she was responsible. She sometimes felt maybe they'd be better off without her, and remain in love with each other. Because of this, she was initially mad that Peter's parents died and she had to take care of Peter, worried that it would destroy the love in their family. She didn't want the cycle to repeat. But Peter shifted her entire perspective and taught her plenty about love and what a family can be. And the reason she gives is that while Peter had the intellect of his parents, he had the heart of Ben Parker. There are so many other examples I could pull from, but I feel like this is already enough to refute this point.
And within the original Stan Lee run, he was, mentioned only 3 times in 30 issues, and was overshadowed by Johnny Bloody Storm when it came to Peter Parker's role models.
Ooh, Johnny Storm. Spider-Man told us all about him.
Maybe shut up now.
Yeah, maybe don't.
We're just talking here.
Spidey told us that he was a brainless, swell-headed, loudmouth jerk who's just a knuckle-headed pain in the neck. And people say Deadpool's the shit talker? The modesty. He's only one annoyance away from telling Johnny that he's a megalomaniacal psychotic asshole, a finger-licking dead-inside pixie slab, a third-rate dime store nut milk that can lick his goddamn cinnamon ring clean and kick rocks all the way to blonde hell. But sure, Peter respects Johnny so much that he tells him to buzz off when he offers to help him, or when he tries to literally hit on his girlfriend in front of him.
He was never a Jesus figure.
Ben was never a Jesus figure. I know this is a hyperbole, but Aunt May begs to differ, because she literally describes Peter as a gift from God, someone who had the heart of Uncle Ben.
And this difference is the result of Sam Raimi and Stan Lee's Spider-Man being basically 2 completely different people with completely different origins.
Peter gets bit by a spider. He wanted to use his newfound powers selfishly. He let it get the best of him, so he ignored a robber that he could have stopped. Ben died because of this. Peter learns his lesson through the guilt of that event. It's the same origin story at its core.
But where Sam Raimi gave him a loop, because he had Peter Parker start out as an unremarkable kind kid, who's not particularly smart nor witty, gains powers, become a jerk, but then the guilt from Uncle Ben's death pulls him back, and he spends the rest of his life going out of his way to stay the same sweet kid from before. Real Spider-Man's origin is more like a ribbon. Real Peter Parker already had great power and potential in him, for the reason that he's the only person who got a scholarship due to science, and he didn't get bitten out of random chance. He was literally the only person who wanted to go. And finally, and this is the most important one, Peter Parker was always a jerk, even before his powers.
So I'm gonna pull up the Aunt May panel again, but that simply isn't true. Peter is meant to be a good kid at heart, but he can be corrupted to darker thoughts by his lack of respect and bullying at school, or just the world as a whole. He can show kindness because that's what his uncle taught him, but he can become spiteful and prideful as a result of people who don't treat him well, and new opportunities to one-up other people.
He bloody openly declared, "Someday I'll show them. Someday they'll be sorry that they laughed at me."
So Peter Parker is a jerk because he thinks spiteful thoughts about people who bully him? That's enough for him to be an innately bad person now?
And he frickin' let the criminal go, not to get back at someone, but just because he can. As a guy who was bullied, he was looking to find ways to hurt the world that once ignored him.
So you say that Peter didn't let the robber go to get back at someone, but right afterwards admit that Peter was looking for ways to get back at the world that once ignored him. That seems like a clear-cut contradiction. In fact, that actually demonstrates that Raimi understood this.
He specifically says, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, that's me."
So the panel literally suggests that he's doing this out of spite, just like in Raimi's movie.
These differences aren't decorative, they fundamentally change what Peter's lesson is and his trajectory in life, for the reason that in the comics, Ben's death doesn't make him go, "Oh no, I need to go back to the way I was."
That's not the point of Raimi's movie. The point is to not let the power corrupt the good in him. You can be a good kid at heart, but later on give in to temptations to get back at those who have wronged you. What he learns is that he shouldn't use his powers this way. He should be using it to help people.
Instead, his death puts on display how flawed Peter's thinking is. Therefore, by being Spider-Man, he doesn't go back to the way he was, a kid looking to rise up on the bullying food chain in order to inflict the same pain he experienced himself, but he breaks the cycle of douchebaggery, to use his strength not to bully like Flash did to him, but to protect others.
So, just like in Raimi's movie.
Real Spider-Man isn't about how noble it is to hold on and stay the same. It's about the importance of changing your fundamental attitude with others when you hit a certain point in life.
Which is literally what Peter does in his first 2 movies. He has an arc in the first movie dedicated to understanding what responsibility is. He has an arc in the second movie dedicated to understanding balance and great sacrifice.
This is why Peter Parker's most consistent antagonist throughout Stan Lee's run is J. Jonah Jameson. He's who Peter Parker could have been if he grew up without letting go of his narcissistic and selfish outlook. And it's why in this story, the starting point is Jonah Jameson and it ends with Uncle Ben. Peter Parker learns to listen to his conscience by reassociating himself with Uncle Ben's memory. As he declares, "I can never permit one innocent being to come to harm because Spider-Man failed to act." This is a direct rebuttal of J. Jonah Jameson's argument. Peter's sacrifice is not his happiness with his social circles, but to listen to his own voice while always being harassed.
I don't even know what he means by that last part, but Peter literally acknowledges after he quits that he has more time to commit to his friends and family, and he says, no matter how big the burden may carry in that panel, which is him acknowledging that he has to sacrifice his personal life to be Spider-Man.
This reaches its symbolic climax when Peter Parker reclaims his Spider-Man costume from JJ. And now, Spidey's back in action, and as far as the world's concerned, they better believe it. So Spider-Man, as a responsibility, isn't his loyalty to someone else, but his loyalty with himself.
Peter isn't loyal to Ben's ideas just for the sake of being loyal to Ben. Peter is loyal to Ben's ideas because they inspire responsibility. He understands those ideas and why they're important. This is how Spider-Man should be, and how he's depicted in the comics being referenced. Perhaps Raimi made Uncle Ben so important to Peter's heroic qualities because that literally is the case.
The boy who was gaslit into thinking that what he was doing was wrong finds salvation through believing in himself.
And Aunt May's speech encourages Peter to believe in himself. She explains to Peter what he did for Henry and why he needs Spider-Man to come back.
Therefore, it is crucial that Uncle Ben grows from an unimportant place.
If Uncle Ben was written as if he comes from an unimportant place, then that'd be massively disrespectful to his character.
Because it marks an important shift, a new stage in his life. The first 30 issues are like a sitcom, the next 20 issues is a melodrama, and now it's become a crime saga. These phases in different tones are incredibly important because it's what makes Spider-Man a real and dynamic character who's always changing, who lives in a world that makes you laugh, cry, and then come to accept it.
Yeah, we get that from the Raimi trilogy. We need laughs? Yeah, we got that. We need cry moments? Yeah, we got that. We need Peter to come and accept the world he lives in? Yeah, we have that too.
However, because the Raimi movies had artificially inflated Uncle Ben's importance, they couldn't do any of this.
This is thoroughly disprovable as I've shown earlier, but why don't I talk about another Spider-Man story that highlights how important Uncle Ben is? It happens to remind you that Uncle Ben did say the great responsibility line. This is from Peter Parker's Spider-Man issue 33, an issue that is entirely focused on Uncle Ben rather than being a usual Spider-Man adventure. It primarily focuses on baseball games that Peter and Ben would watch throughout the years, where the Mets would always lose the World Series, with seemingly no path to victory. This is symbolic of the moral of the story, which is essentially that you can't win everything in life, no matter how hard you try. It's okay to accept that, especially since it'll make the wins in life all the more meaningful. The story ends with Peter celebrating the victory during the last Mets game he ever watched with Ben, and simply seeing Ben smile was enough for all of it to make sense for him. It explains why Peter picks up his glove and Mets hat and takes the same route to watch the Mets play every year. It's one of the most meaningful memories he has of Ben and informs his perspective on winning and losing in life. I really can't see how Uncle Ben's importance was artificially inflated by the Raimi movies just because Ben wasn't as prominent in the Lee and Ditko run. If anything, Raimi's version of Uncle Ben doesn't have as much established importance as he does in the comics. The comics make Ben look way more important and impactful to Peter and May, which makes sense considering how much history the comics have, but it refutes this point regardless.
Instead, they had to flip it. Spider-Man 2 is about Peter Parker dismissing Uncle Ben, then realizing he was right all along, and then going back to the same place he started with.
No, Spider-Man 2 is about finding a healthy balance to overcome self-doubt, instead of taking the hardships and challenges as signs that you weren't cut out for the greater responsibilities, and rather to accept them as necessary sacrifices for the greater good.
He doesn't grow or change, and the world he lives in doesn't feel any different. Instead, he's only lucky that someone else had the balls to make the decision for him.
Peter does grow and change. Peter could have said no to MJ like he did before, but MJ tells him that she wants to face the risks with him, and that Peter deserves happiness and love, even if his job is dangerous. It's not healthy to lean so heavily into your work and forget the human part of you that is also worth taking care of. Peter doesn't have to reject love to be a superhero. He can do both.
If this was real Spider-Man, he would have let his first love go.
Why? Peter loves MJ for the person she is, and they truly did have a connection with each other in the last movie. So what benefit is there to Peter letting go of MJ if he does love her and never got to fully express that until later?
And we would have faded forward by a few years and have him bump into her after she's married and realize that, yeah, his feelings were those of a boy, not of a man. I know this because one of my favorite Spider-Man moments of all time is this very moment from issue 41, as Peter Parker privately thinks, "Once I thought I couldn't live without her. Now, she's just another girl named Betty. Boy, have I grown up in these past few months."
You're forgetting that MJ feels exactly that about Peter.
I can't survive without you.
And Peter has no reason to move on from MJ because their relationship hasn't fallen out as badly as Peter and Betty's has. Peter gave up on Betty because he thinks she believes Peter isn't the guy for her, someone who is a plain average Joe like Ned Leeds. That can never be Peter, so he concludes that this was never meant to be. But MJ tells Peter she loves him because he chose to support MJ for the person she is, instead of using her like Harry did, and he encouraged her to be herself instead of shaming her like her father did. She hasn't forgotten that.
She's waiting for you, pal.
And Peter did let go of her after she said he's nothing but an empty seat. He had no plans of pursuing her until he quit being Spider-Man, which means he can be that average Joe for MJ that can be there for her more often. And even when MJ calls him back after Peter was motivated by Aunt May to become Spider-Man again, Peter still rejects MJ despite making it clear that she still loves Peter. Peter knows MJ hasn't let go or tried to push Peter away, unlike how Betty was seemingly trying to tell Peter that he's not a fit for her from Peter's perspective. And even after MJ knows he's Spider-Man and understands it all, and still wants to be with Peter, he still rejects MJ.
Then you know why we can't be together. You and I can never be. You shouldn't be here.
Peter was already intending to let MJ go like you just described with Betty, but MJ insisted otherwise.
I realize now we never had anything in common. It's just that she was the first girl I loved.
Why would Peter come to this same realization with MJ? They do have things in common and help each other develop in meaningful ways. She's literally a fan of Spider-Man and respects what he does and represents. They both value being true to yourself no matter how people judge you. Peter helped MJ through this because MJ only pursued acting further because Peter encouraged her, while everyone else didn't care or ridiculed her. And while Peter was bullied by most, she was one of the few people to stick up for Peter and show him kindness. And she's the one who helps Peter realize that he doesn't have to choose misery to be a hero. He can choose love and be a hero. I really don't see a reason why Peter would ever let MJ go.
Spider-Man doesn't look back. He always looks forward. Okay? Subsequently, if I had to summarize the difference between Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Stan Lee's Spider-Man, is that one is about letting go and the other is about holding on. Stan Lee's Peter Parker is someone who learns to absorb the progress he made and let go of his insecurities.
He literally absorbs the progress he made when Aunt May tells him what he did for Henry, and the train scene is literally representative of that. Not only does it prove Aunt May right about how there's a hero in all of us, but it communicates to Peter that he played a part in this and gets saved in return for it. This is absorbing the progress he made, and why he sees so much value in what he does.
Let go of the narcissistic asshole he was before he got his powers.
He literally did. Well, okay, maybe not in Spider-Man 3, but this video is about Spider-Man 2, where he's never a narcissistic asshole.
Let go of his need for vindication.
Where does he hold on to his need for vindication? He literally takes accountability for Ben's death in the movie.
And let go of his awkwardness to take charge confidently of his own life.
Taking charge of his own life is part of what he learns from MJ.
It's wrong that we should only be half alive, half of ourselves.
Spider-Man 2 is about holding on to someone else's dream.
Ben's dream is for Peter to take his gifts and use them for greatness. That's the kind of man he wants Peter to become.
These are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. With great power comes great responsibility.
Why wouldn't Spider-Man hold on to this? In what world does Spider-Man let go of Ben's wishes? Certainly not the comics, considering he believes the best of him came from Ben. Well, I know there's one version he might be talking about.
You're saying the lives of a billion strangers are more important than my loved ones?
Holding on to his first love.
He's holding on to his love for MJ because he loves MJ. How is it unlike Spider-Man to hold on to the people he loves?
And holding on to his innocence.
He's literally admitting Uncle Ben's death was his fault in the senior showing. How is he holding on to his innocence?
Because to change, he would risk losing his kindness.
That depends on how he changes.
The movie goes as far as using Peter Parker letting go of Mary Jane as a false climax because she comes back. He gets what he's holding out for because that's who he is. That's the existential limits of him.
So let me get this straight. You acknowledge that Peter is willing to let go of MJ, but your proof that he simply holds on and doesn't let anything go is that he accepts MJ's love when she comes back to him and insists that he remains true to himself? If we want to stretch the standard this far, Peter should just let go of Aunt May and never talk to her again, because he lets go instead of holding on, right? No, that's a really strange way to frame his character. Peter would not reject MJ's love when he loves her back, just for the sake of letting go instead of holding on. Like, I don't understand this dichotomy that's being presented here.
And don't get me wrong, that's a beautiful message. Spider-Man 2 is a beautiful film that I love, but I have to say, it's just not very Spider-Man.
Spider-Man 2 is probably the most Spider-Man a Spider-Man movie has ever gotten. Well, okay, we do have the first Raimi movie, and we do have the Spider-Verse movies as well, but Spider-Man 2 is up there with them.
Underneath my critical position, I hope my message of love is not lost, because I'm not writing this essay to crap all over Spider-Man 2 or Sam Raimi, but to highlight Stan Lee's work because there's a real heartbreaking lack of affection or even simply knowledge of them. It's popular now for people to turn their backs on Stan Lee's work in order to fetishize the Raimi trilogy.
But you can't just look at Stan Lee's work and call it a day. Many different writers have contributed to improving and evolving Spider-Man's character and mythos. Most of what you said that was not very Spider-Man-like are things that can be refuted either through Stan Lee's work or other writers who have shaped the character over the years.
I was in that group myself. My original Spider-Man trilogy analysis was written as a defense back when it was mainly a subject of mockery. However, now it seems like we've completely swung the other way, and the public's idea of what Spider-Man is and should be is completely distorted, to the extent that the other films that adapt the character more closely to the comics and therefore defy Raimi's changes, they tend to get crapped all over.
Really weird choice to show Andrew's Spider-Man, because how he handles the Lizard in this movie would be a character assassination for Peter in the comics. He refuses to turn in Kurt and keeps his Lizard fiasco a secret, knowing that Kurt wasn't himself and is a good man at his core. So it wouldn't be fair to send him to the police for that. Peter's first instinct upon finding out that Kurt is the Lizard is to report his name to the police and take photos of his fight with him. That's antithetical to what Peter would do in the comics.
Poor Andrew Garfield finally did the confident, flirty trickster act from Stan Lee's run, and he gets poo-pooed all over.
I'm pretty sure most people are in favor of Andrew Garfield's personality as Peter Parker. I for sure am and would agree with that in isolation. His personality fits Peter Parker more than Tobey Maguire's version, but his character journeys and morals are far more detached from the comics than Tobey's version. I want to start off with the very obvious problem people have with this Spider-Man and why they criticize him so much. So, he stops to joke around with Alexei when he's speeding in a truck full of plutonium, and because of that he's able to crash into people and possibly get them killed. That's not like Spider-Man at all, the guy who wants to make sure what happened to Ben happens to no one else, or how Peter just casually takes a call from Gwen instead of actively pursuing the speeding truck that could be hitting other people right now. And it's not even just in this scene or movie where he's like this. Peter blatantly ignores a bunch of cars after saving Jack, when we know at least one of them had a person inside that Peter didn't save yet. But he chose to swing the other way, and Peter's secret identity is something very important to him. So let's just see how good Andrew is at being protective of it. He swings around in his street clothes in broad daylight for no reason. He unmasks himself at his school for no reason. He swings to Gwen in his street clothes in broad daylight for no reason. He uses his web shooters at Oscorp of all places for no reason. I think you get the point. He's not careful with his identity at all. Compare this to Spider-Man 2, where Peter realizes that he's unmasked when he wakes up and immediately treats it as a big deal when his face is visible. These aren't all the problems I have with Andrew's version, but I think it's enough to simply point out how there are lots of reasons people criticize his character or claim he isn't accurate to the comics.
The MCU finally pushed Uncle Ben out of the way to focus on Peter Parker's relationship with other heroes, just like in the first 30 issues, and even followed the sitcom tone, and he gets ridiculed for it.
Alright, I'm not typing another paragraph for MCU Spider-Man. Go watch Colin's video on Far From Home. He breaks down how Peter is thoroughly assassinated in that movie. It's not even just for the fact that he was gonna ditch the world to go on a vacation, but Peter makes a lot of dumb decisions, doesn't protect his identity either, and is overall a really bad hero. And go watch my No Way Home video if you want to see the problems I have with him in that movie. That's just about it as far as the points left responding to in the video. If you disagree with anything, be sure to come on Disagreement Day. We try to do these every week or so. That's all I got for now. Goodbye.